Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Start Small, Think Big podcast brought to you by Digital Meld. My name is Brad Grew, co-founder and CEO of Digital Meld.
My name is Robert Grew, co-founder and CTO at Digital Meld.
Hello, my name is Hannah Darley, and I'm the Chief AI Officer at Geordie AI.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Hannah. If you can't tell, she's not from Texas like Robert and I, so she won't say y'all and fixin' and those kind of weird things to talk with that southern drawl, but
No, but I did live there for 7 years, so I had my share of Texas experiences.
Awesome. Well, I that's awesome to hear, but also I'm sorry. Texas is a unique place.
No, it's a treasured time, especially the food. Such great food. And the song, Deep in the Heart of Texas. There's very few places that have their own kind of anthem in the same way.
Yeah, and thanks to Pee-wee's Big Adventure for making that really popular as well. Awesome. So yeah, thanks Hannah for joining us. Hannah has a really unique background that we haven't really had yet on the podcast, so I know Robert and I are really stoked to talk to her about some of her more clandestine or secretive or work she's done in the past with the government. But she's also a founder, and so she's a founder, and she's literally just launched a product, I believe, yesterday. Correct, Hannah?
Yes. Yeah.
And so we're going to hear all about that journey and what that product is and like how they utilized AI and brought together their team and kind of get that founder journey and things to hopefully motivate some others out there who have the idea but don't have the kick in the rear to kind of get up off the ground and start building some cool things. So thanks for joining us, Hannah. Why don't you just take a couple of minutes just to tell everybody about yourself, your backgrounds, your career, kind of what brought you to this point, and then we'll kick it off from there.
Yeah, I love it. I would love to say it's as like architected and orchestrated as it seems from my resume, but honestly, it just kind of flowed naturally. So my background, as you said, is in government. So I spent 10 years doing intelligence operations, worked across the US, UK, NATO, and Five Eyes, and so many great experiences there, but most of them really centered on data, on intelligence theory, structured analytics. How do you test a hypothesis? How do you make sure that when you have evidence for something, you can really validate it and test it? You're not just kind of creating confirmation bias, supporting your own data, etc. And then through all those experiences, clandestine and otherwise, it was really apparent to me that problem solving and creative problem solving was my passion. And so whilst I was still in government, I got my master's degree in psychology. And so was going to go work for the NHS, was going to go be a counseling psychologist, but instead, plot twist, ended up at Darktrace. It was a fantastic chapter for me, really focused on that data foundation and moved into their analysis team, helped them build out threat research as a function. They hadn't had it before. And really, one of my passions was thinking about how do we deliver structured analytics on a massive scale for a company that was so good at anomalies and so good at individual threats? How do we start to think about that as campaigns? How do we start to think about that from a more data-centric view? How can we dig in more? I love data, if you can't tell. Spent 2 years doing that and then moved into R&D once it was up and running because my nightmare is ops. I hate the same day over and over. So helped them build out their product success team and also focused a lot on kind of customer feedback and demonstration. So how do you explain your product really clearly to an audience that may not be as familiar with AI or may not have all the nuances down? And throughout my whole time there, I was part of their strategic subject matter expert team. So one of the people that was called upon to talk about cybersecurity and AI, and all of that fed into my role at Geordie. So all of that was kind of the pipeline through which I arrived.
Awesome. That's obviously a unique background that most of people, obviously with the government work, we've done government work ourselves, Robert and I, but more on the civil side. And there's just a lot of a little nuance with that most people don't realize, and why the big machine moves so slowly. So it's great to hear that the governments are actually utilizing these tools. Obviously, there's been a lot of news about U.S. government specifically signing these large deals with these Silicon Valley companies to kind of kickstart the innovation across these organizations. And I think the one thing that we found during our time is there's a lot of really smart people trying to do their best in the government agencies, but a lot of time it's the bureaucracy. It's the leadership are thinking in 2, 4, and 6-year terms while the people are living their life there. They're working 20, 30, 40 years at these government agencies, and how they navigate that. I'm a big fan of NASA, if you can see my background, and just, the things like each individual leadership at NASA has to deal with every time there's a new president. There's things, and it's just a unique perspective that I don't think, if you're never really exposed to it, you don't really think of all those sorts of issues that are quite unique to that industry.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts for me was always having to tie it to an existing requirement. So there was almost no way if you came across a new problem without retrofitting it to fit an existing problem. And I think I really took that forward with me because it's something I think about a lot now in terms of when I see problems come up in the marketplace, when I think about all sorts of cybersecurity problems. am I only able to use existing solutions to solve that problem? Or is there a better way that hasn't been brought up yet or hasn't been discussed yet that would actually solve that? And so for me, again, passionate about creative problem solving and really importantly, I don't always love linear thinking. I think sometimes we get caught in a trap of like the problem has to be solved this way because the problem's solved this way, instead of like, this is the best way to solve this problem. And so probably my psychology hat on, but I think restructuring our thinking can be really, really helpful in scenarios. And especially in government, it can be a real game changer.
Yeah, that's good there because we work with a lot of oil and gas, construction, blue collar type industries, and the old "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" mentality, right, is definitely there, and there's some validity to it, but it's a balance. It's a delicate balance of yes, it's not broken technically, but we can make it 10x better or 50x better or whatever the numbers are. It's really just have an open mind. I think that's sometimes hard to find, and people can definitely get in those traps. I've definitely been caught in those myself. Of hey, this is just how we've always done it, guys. So let's get it done that way, right? Lowest barrier of entry sometimes for me with those things is what takes place. But no, it's good. I agree with Brad. The government space is it's very interesting. It's definitely different than the typical corporate or enterprise environment, or even, we're working with a lot of mid-market companies. It's really different from that. There's, as far as getting meetings and getting stakeholders and people bought in, is a lot tougher in those industries just because they've seen this before. A lot of those employees that have worked in government, because they're typically there for really, really long time. So sometimes you bounce up against, well, I've seen this pitch before, and I'm not going to really be bought in right now because of it. But no, it's fascinating. I'm excited to jump into this because I'm going to definitely have a lot of stuff on the NHS and other things.
Yeah, there's also a lot of decisional cost. And I think we don't always factor that into security conversations where it's not just, oh, I'm bringing in a new tool, so I have to think financially about it and I have to think, pragmatically about my process, but actually the cost of changing the way that you do things every day and the way that employees or workers or even decision makers have to alter their normal operations outside of the kind of bureaucratic processes, the way that they do things is such a frictional place. And it can be so difficult to get a very small step change overall, but actually it can hold people back quite a bit. And I see that especially in like AI adoption conversations. You tend to hear about kind of thinking about tools and thinking about jobs that you may want it to do, but you're not always thinking about the process and capabilities and how much human behavior is going to have to change as a result of that. So I always think about that as well. Like you have to account for how users are going to feel, or maybe not even users, but just employees who are going to be benefiting from this technology. Are they going to immediately feel those benefits, or are they going to feel like this is a burden because they have to change the way they do things every day?
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and that's a question we have all the time: was how are you going to drive this rethinking within an organization? It has to start from the top down, but it also has to start from the boots up, right? Like I think a lot of folks, the people who are doing the day-to-day operations, or Robert and I like to say, they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones getting stuff done. They're the NCOs in the military, where a lot of decisions are making at the high level view don't necessarily understand the day-to-day business operations and the day-to-day concerns, and so based upon that and your background, what kind of led you into this world of, maybe just give us a short elevator pitch of what Geordie is and like how you went from the, okay, I love data, I love analytics, I love mitigating risk and those things. What kind of led to building this product and deciding that now was the time to jump in and do that?
Yeah, so I think the shortest how did I get here was really the delivery on the promise of AI changing workforces and changing the way that we do business and really delivering the kind of ROI that people always talk about. I really saw that from applied AI systems, especially in my time at Darktrace. And I think once you see AI in action in a way that really does deliver value and really does change fundamentally the way that businesses are not only operating but like working, the way that they are able to reduce labor, the way that they're able to think about more things. I mean, the cognitive load is so significant in some of these businesses, especially like SOC teams. You think about how much stress they're under all the time, and then you see an AI solution that not only reduces that stress but also gives them additional information that they can use day to day. That's transformational. And so really the passion was kind of birthed there. It was also birthed in government, seeing kind of gaps. There could be a really great solution to this problem, but perhaps it's not ready now. And so all of that kind of drove us into, well, what is the future? And for us, that's agents. Agents are going to fundamentally change the way the workforce is. It's going to fundamentally think we're going to think differently about business operations, and that's already happening. Agent adoption is not just theoretical, it's happening now. And so at Geordie, one of the things that we're most passionate about is really enabling that innovation, but not having to sacrifice security. Because I think one of the things that can come into contention is it's really great to say yes to innovation and it's really wonderful to have new technology, but sometimes people feel like they have to put the cart before the horse and they have to just enable innovation and go at 100 miles an hour without any controls and just see what happens and then try to build it as they fly it. But actually, I think if you don't want to necessarily unleash risk, you have a unique opportunity in technology to build in security from the very beginning, where in most previous security iterations, we've always had to play catch up. We've always had to retrofit. So fundamentally, what does Geordie do? We deliver posture management, observability, and contextual interventions to help turn blind spots into visibility and unmanaged exposure into governed outcomes for AI agents. So that is everywhere you buy, build, or use AI agents. We want to help security teams to manage and mitigate risk, but also have insight and visibility into AI adoption.
That was great. And I'm very curious on your thoughts because I've asked this people a lot when they talk about AI agents. What is agentic AI agents? What is that to you? And the reason I asked, I'll preface it, is I think a lot of marketing folks have taken over the term agentic. I think everybody would agree with that a little bit. And everybody has a little bit of a different mindset on it. So I'm curious what yours is.
Yeah, so when I started talking about this, I started talking about it as autonomous AI because I think that can be somewhat more helpful, especially differentiating between automation. So, an AI agent is fundamentally an AI system that is capable of making decisions without human oversight and also has the ability to execute tasks. So it's kind of twofold in terms of what it's capable of from a reasoning perspective and then what it can do from an actions perspective. And that can be as simple as an LLM, large language model with a tool, or it can be really complex. It doesn't have to be large language models. It could be unsupervised machine learning. It could be HRM. Like there's so many different AI applications out there. And when we talk about agentic, really the focal point is on the behavior and the decision making. So one key differentiation I always talk about is automation is just predetermined decisions being executed. It's essentially like writing a to-do list and then having someone else do that to-do list. This is completely different from autonomy. So this agent, this system is making decisions based on the context and the real world events that it encounters. And so it's not taking a predetermined decision. It's actually boots on the ground, to use your phrase, making those decisions as it goes. And that's really, really fundamental to not only understand what it's capable of in terms of business operations, that's why there's so much operational leverage there, but also it has associated risks. They're making decisions and therefore there's potentially unexpected behavior. There's possibly hidden risks. One thing is silent failure. So you have the right access, you have your data protected, but they over optimize or they try to pursue a goal too much. And then they end up doing something that you didn't account for and ends up being a problem, whether it violates your policies or not. And so it's really important to focus on that decision-making element because that really is what separates it from a lot of other AI applications.
I would agree. Sorry, Brad. I would agree with that definition because I think what I've been finding, at least when we talk to customers, is a lot of the agentic AI that they've been sold or are trying to secure or whatever it is they're trying to do with it is just traditional automation with Power Automate or N8N or Zapier or one of those. And so that's great. I have a few more questions, but Brad, I'll let you jump in here.
No, I would just say, based upon obviously with that autonomy, like you said, comes risk, right? With the ability to go and make decisions on its own and go make actions on its own. So can you just talk to, or just maybe give a couple of minutes on risk and how, agentic AI does have obviously elevated risk. We like to preach about human in the loop here, but can you talk about maybe how there's a fine balance with Geordie and your ethos on utilizing that human in the loop plus using agents?
Yeah, so often in security, we tend to talk about a very specific type of cyber risk, which is kind of external influence. So someone somewhere does something to affect a system or affect a tool or even affect a person. And so because of that, there's this string of risk that is essentially centered on that external person, whether that's a threat actor, it could be even an insider threat, but it's all based on a person taking an action. And that could be through code, but it's really centered around that person. I would say that accounts for maybe a third of the risk that you're talking about with agentic AI, because essentially you also have then human risk where you have independent decision making, you have unexpected behaviors, you have a lack of context that means that you don't make the best choice that you could. You have unexpected tool use or misuse. You have resource misuse. And so there's this whole category that doesn't involve a threat actor or doesn't involve kind of an external influence where things could still go quite wrong for a business. And it might not result in something really big like data leakage, but it could result in reputational damage or even from a regulatory perspective. So it's really important to have that holistic picture of risk. And that's something that we spend a lot of time on at Geordie. I think the other piece that's really important for us is contextual intervention. So it's very, very great when you have guardrails in place to help mitigate risks. It's a good thing. It's table stakes. It's like having a seatbelt. It's important and it's helpful. But just like with LLMs that can operate around ethical guardrails, etc., with jailbreaks, and you've seen that 100 times on LinkedIn. So can AI agents. They're decision-making entities. They can evolve past guardrails. And so it's really important that you're not just giving them a guardrail or like a rule system to abide by, but instead you're injecting context. So that's what we do. We have a product called Beam, and it's really centered around giving agents context so that they make better decisions. And it works agent native because a lot of other security controls are helpful, but they're not AI aware a lot of the time. And they don't always have the best fine tune for what's a workload versus what's an agent. Agents don't have kill switches. So you can't just kill a process like you would with kind of your traditional EDR, XDR. You have to think about the longevity, the visibility, the processes. So it could affect other systems if you tried to kill that process.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for that context. Again, we kind of preach risk quite regularly because, again, like you said, that reputational risk is kind of the biggest thing. You only have one chance to make a good first impression, right? And I think we've seen some issues with some of the tools kind of and the businesses getting egg on their faces. There's these hyper early adopters. Not saying that you can't be an early adopter and boost your business, but always take risk into account. And that should be part of what we call generally an AI or a data center of excellence that you have within your organization. So that should be something you really look at. And I love that Geordie has that built in inherently in the platform as a top line item. So we'll dive more, I think, into the agentic stuff and more about Geordie in a minute. But I'd really love to talk about like how you like assembled your team, because we do have a lot of aspiring startup founders. We do have a lot of founders. Like how you assembled your team, how you guys came together, came up with an idea and decided on what areas to focus, and then how you got to that POC and MVP, and how did AI help you accelerate that process?
Absolutely. How did we assemble our team and how do we kind of start this founder's journey? We really started from a foundation of relationships. So my CEO and I, Henry, we worked together at Darktrace. He was COO Americas and did all sorts of wonderful executive business leadership, helped us lead us through the exit most recently with Tom Bravo. And he basically is a business genius. And then he and I were talking about this problem space and really thinking through, how do we solve this? How do we think about it? And we knew we needed a technical genius. So we knew Benji, who is our CTO, and he's honestly a wizard. That's the only way to describe him, but he's ex-Sneak. So he really gets data, he really gets engineering, and he really gets technical problem solving, especially for applications. And he also just recently came from MindGuard. So he saw firsthand kind of evaluation tools and AI and what those gaps were. And from there, luckily, we had essentially the same vision when we came together, which I think is probably really unique. Most people probably start with different answers to the same problem and you have to reconcile them. So I would say abnormal, but really great and really convenient. So we had basically the same idea around how to solve this problem really creatively. And really, it was to focus on agents themselves. Really focus on what makes agents unique, really focus on how agents behave, how they operate, and also where you see gaps in security right now. And so from there, we happen to have really fantastic networks. So all of our engineers are from Sneak, all of our founding engineers are from Sneak. There was a really great dynamic there where a lot of people had worked together before, which was lovely. And we really wanted to create a low ego culture. So we really wanted to make sure that not only did everyone get along, but also that everybody had collective ownership. We're solving this problem together. It's not just Henry, it's not just me, it's not just Henry, Benji, and I, it's all of us. And then we recently brought on our COO in New York. So we'd worked with him at Darktrace before. And then we're starting to hire out of network now, which is really fun. And I think in terms of how we assemble the team, the key for us, and Henry does a better job at talking about this, but it's really so much about the culture. It's really so much about how do we make sure that not only can these people work together, but that we can work toward a common goal. It's going to be hard work at some points. How do we make sure that we put employees first? And also, how do we make sure that this is the best chapter of their careers? Because really, at the end of the day, that's what we want for ourselves. That's what we want for all of the Geordies. We want this to be the thing that you look back on in your career and you're like, that was the best. That was the best part. And so that's kind of how we got here.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing the insights for that, because again, we do have folks who are trying to assemble their team and they're not really sure how to start. I go to a Founders Friday once a month with a group of founders, and VCs come in, and it's just they're trying to grow and scale their teams. And what Robert and I kind of preach is it's all about networking. You never know, like you said, your founding team was all people you had worked with before. You had great relationships before, and you probably knew when you first worked with them, like, man, I'd love to work with them again in the future. And you just maintain that relationship and do that. And so that's what I recommend to everyone. Get involved in your local community. Like we have the Houston AI Club here in Houston, and just get involved with other like-minded people. And I think eventually you'll find your team. And if you're a non-technical founder, you will find technical people out there who will be willing to take that leap with you as well. And so it's an inspirational story. So thank you for talking about that. And obviously it sounds like you have a tremendous team with a really talented team. So no wonder that the looking through the docs and stuff for Geordie is as polished as it is, because it looks like a great product. And I really like the foundation, what you're doing with the foundationally from the start to do things the right way.
Thank you so much. And I think if you were to ask me, like, what would you recommend, especially if you are maybe not as technical, I think really be able to listen and also know your strengths. I think something that you can struggle with, and something that I've certainly struggled with, is I'm not really a person who wants to be the center of attention. I'm not necessarily a high ego person. And so it's very easy for me to tell you the things that I don't know and the things that I do know, and sort of differentiate it that way. And I think for some people, it feels like I shouldn't say that I don't know that, or I can't tell people that I'm not as confident there. And I think you want to do the opposite when you're finding your founders. I think the best the best thing that we found is really, having a great team that has different strengths that all work together. So not necessarily having 3 identical or 4 identical or 2 identical people that have the exact same set of skills, that have the exact same, personas, and can be in the same rooms like the best way. I think it's really about complementary skills. And so I think own what you know and what you don't know, and also don't be afraid to ask. And I think if you're not super technical, you can become technical. I think it's a total myth that you just exist as a non-technical being for your entire life. Like, it is so learnable. I have an arts degree and my master's of science degree is psychology, so I'd call it shaky at best. I'm a pretty technical person, but I didn't necessarily do computer science. I emphatically didn't do computer science at school, and so it's also a myth, I think, that you are just going to exist as this non-technical being for the rest of your life. You can absolutely learn it. It's achievable. And it's also something that a diversity of voices can be really helpful. It happens regularly that there'll be a group of engineers solving a problem, and then someone non-technical will come up and go, do you know there's a light switch to do that? And they're like, what? They've spent like 3 weeks on something that's a super amazing technical solution, overlooking just something that is kind of right in front of you. And I think diversity of thought is so important for that, especially in problem solving. If you're all linear thinkers, or if you're all loop thinkers where you're going back and forth, you're probably going to approach the problem in the exact same way. You want different points of light to solve the problem, like a prism.
Yeah, I have a traditional IT background, and I can't tell you how many times in my career, working my way up through infrastructure, how little most people talk to the people they actually support. And they do things and they build things that truly aren't needed. And then you go and ask why they're not using it. It's like, we don't need that. Similar to what you were saying. I think communication, getting multiple mindsets. And I honestly argue with people all the time. If you're not technical, I would argue you probably have an advantage, because that means you're probably more on the operational side and you know the business in and out. To me, learning the technical stuff is getting easier and easier now, especially AI and LLMs, agentic AI as well. It's all getting accessible for everybody now. It's still not perfect, and that's why, around to help fix, all the safety issues. But the barrier of entry is lower than ever, and it's only going to get lower and lower and lower. And so I always tell people, don't lose your confidence with technology, because seriously, you can go now. You have access to you did before, but now it's even, it's right in front of you. And so I try to embrace it as best as you can, because I completely agree. To say that I'm just not a technical person, I don't think that's true at all. It's a matter of learning and we say this all the time, a consistent learner. That is the world we live in now. The days of not learning every day are over. unfortunately. And so you have to be able to learn, pivot, and try new things for sure.
Well, and think about it. I mean, businesses are facing the same challenges that we are as individuals. Everyone's having to learn a very technical area that was previously quite abstract, or for technical teams, didn't necessarily leave data science teams, didn't necessarily leave product teams, and maybe didn't make its way to the finance, the HR, the business people. And so now you have this almost democratization of AI where actually pretty much everybody has some sort of a touch point with it and needs to understand that it's basically maths. It's non-mystical, it's not an oracle, it doesn't have the font of all knowledge. It would be great if it did, but instead it's a series of applications that are differently orientated. Sometimes it's better for predicting data, sometimes it's better for generating text, sometimes it's better for executing tasks. But there's all different applications from simple Excel functions all the way up through to deep learning. Like as a spectrum, and businesses are all learning that, especially as they're adopting agentic AI. We all face that same challenge, and it's super overcomable. I don't think it's a word, but I'm making it a word.
Those, again, great insights. We say it all the time. Robert kind of touched base on it, but like, I'm not an AI expert. I know the tool really, really well. You are an AI expert because you have your institutional knowledge and you have your historical knowledge of your business. LLMs and most AI models are trained off of scraping the open internet, right? Like, and so there's so much data that's not on the open internet to be scraped. It's in people's heads and inboxes and desktops. And I think that's where the real power comes from, and utilizing these tools and understanding how you can upskill yourself and train yourself to unlock the potential of all that institutional knowledge. And we're talking to a client now who they have a gentleman who started the business 40 years ago, super intelligent, and everything about their operations goes through him. He's the last set of eyes, and he's trying to retire. He's getting up there in age, and he also wants to be able to scale the business now that their business is growing. And he can't really do that because he's the person that has that institutional knowledge in head. So basically, we're trying to recreate his brain in a model to utilize to help streamline their operations. And we would never, Robert and I, no matter how much we research their industry, would never be able to do that. But sitting down with him, just knowing the tools and knowing the best way to do that is how we do that. And so I think that opens it up to the next question we have is, how we take it all the time. We're business analysts more than we're technologists at this point, because we need to know how that business works. We need to empathize with the end user and the boots on the ground, as we say. So how does Geordie approach that? And how does your platform kind of like approach that, where you have to build a tool that's industry agnostic, but at the same time, you need to understand the inner workings of a business to help them succeed to their highest potential?
Yeah, I think the first part is just being really close to customer. Whenever I talk about product strategy, I always kind of talk about like 0 feet between us and the customer. And I really think that that's the key, because if you don't understand what your customers are doing and what their pain points are, you're really not going to build a helpful solution. And I don't just mean from like closing a deal, because sometimes immediately when we start talking about pain points, we transition to ROI and deal closing. But instead, it's really about how is this product, not just something shiny and technical and fun, really going to solve problems for that customer? How is it really going to change the hurdles that they have, or decrease the labor that they're performing, or make their lives easier, kind of simply put? And so distance to customer, 0, net 0, really, really low. I think the other thing that we always think about in terms of how do we make sure that we understand enough about the business is that we understand agents. And I think doing research, colorfully dog fooding, but using agents and kind of practicing what you preach in that way is super important, because I think otherwise you kind of come at it from 2 or 3 degrees of separation where you're like, oh, I think this is what this agent does. I've seen Copilot's website, or I've looked at Clary's offering, or I've browsed AWS's new Bedrock offerings in the news. So I have a good idea of what their differentiation is. But actually, how do you feel when you're using it? One of the first things I did was I sat down with our devs and was like, okay, you're building all these agents and all of these tools. What did you learn, so that we could pass that on to customers? Because again, that networking piece, but just sharing that knowledge and really making sure that you understand the technology that you're building for, not just the technology that you're building, is critical.
Yeah, that's good. And one of the things I was curious about when I was doing some research, and you probably have the best insight out of anybody we've spoken to, just because your whole business model is around this agentic AI and working with businesses that are actively using it. What are you seeing out there from a like operational business perspective? What is the most common agents you're seeing? And again, you don't have to get into the fine details, but a lot of our users, or sorry, a lot of our listeners are probably, and just, people we work with, they hear it's so great. They hear it's awesome. I feel like a lot of startups, A lot of smaller, leaner companies that are more technically minded, typically younger founders are using agentic AI daily now. But a lot of these, blue collar, smaller companies, let's say 100 to 200 people, but they're bringing in anywhere from 100 million to nearly $1 billion in revenue. Those are the companies we're talking to all the time, and they're doing nothing. So what are you seeing that maybe could help those type of people?
I think the first thing that I would mention is that when we talk to especially like medium and large enterprises, they have AI committees. They've formed AI committees. They usually consist of the CISO or someone from security, legal, data or privacy, if you have that, GRC, that kind of a committee. And it's mostly them that's kind of the review board for use cases. And these use cases are coming from all across the business. They're coming from HR, they're coming from finance. And it's people who are doing research on their own sometimes. It's people who are coming up with their own business cases and saying, hey, I want to be able to consolidate accounts instead of doing it in Excel. I want to use this tool that does it for me, whether it's Agentforce or whether it's a different revenue source. I want something to do this task for me that I hate. And most of the business cases could probably be boiled down to that. I have a task that takes too long, it's too much work. It isn't efficient for my time. It's not the best use of my resources, and I have to complete it for the business to keep going. And I think one of the easy myths about agents is that they're doing superfluous tasks. They're doing things that aren't already being done, or they're, doing something completely new. But quite often they're doing business as usual. They're doing tasks that have to happen, from revenue processing to hiring new employees or screening them at least, to consolidating accounts, to delivering invoices, to doing market research on M&As. Like, there's so many different use cases, and they're coming from all across the business. I think another thing that I hear about quite a bit is the build buy debate. And I think it's different from a lot of traditional security and a lot of traditional software. You don't necessarily, with agents, have a guaranteed build versus buy decision. And then what I mean by that is that they're narrow and deep technology. The best way that they're used is when they're really, really context and task specific. And so there'll be some scenarios where you need to buy something from a vendor, from a verticalized agent provider, from something that comes off the shelf that you can ad lib on top of. And there's other times where it's going to make a lot more sense for you to build something specific. But I think the idea that you'll either be a build or buy shop in the way that traditional software kind of allowed you to be is really, really different in agentic AI. And I think when you think about what's the future of agents looking like, especially in agent teams, so individual employees running teams of agents and having orchestration, it's really an ecosystem. It's not just one vendor. It's not just one provider. It's not just one platform where you're building everything, even if you have a really technical workbench. And so for companies that are maybe a little bit smaller, they're not necessarily a small business, but they're not a, Fortune 100 company. The thing to be thinking about, and actually the thing that Fortune 100 should be thinking about, is what's the problem that I'm trying to solve? And how does this AI solve that problem? If you do that, you will be miles ahead of where you want to be in terms of adding the right functionality, measuring success, knowing what good looks like when you implement the technology, and also really seeing that return on investment. Because sometimes there's a solution mismatch in terms of, we think it's going to solve this problem, but actually it just gives us another process or a new process that we didn't have before. And so really thinking through that lens. I think the other thing that I would say about what we're seeing in terms of vendors and consolidation is people are pragmatic. If you have licenses with something like a Copilot, it makes sense to trial Copilot Studio or Azure Foundry. If you have all of your data in Google, it makes sense to try and build something in Google's ADK. It makes sense. If you are an AWS house and you have loads of experts in Lambda, it makes sense to build something in Bedrock. And so you also see a lot of pragmatism in the market, and I think that's kind of expected, but there's still, I don't think, just one platform that is ever going to be the agent platform. I think it's always going to be that ecosystem idea, which is why visibility and governance is so important, because it's not just one tool that you have to learn. It's a whole ecosystem of digital employees that are going to be operating on your behalf.
Yeah, we say all the time, and I think you've done a way better job at describing it than I do, but the way software is and what was in the past, it's just going to be, I think it's just going to be completely different. Just the build versus buy, and I'm definitely going to use that because that's the debate we have with people all the time, right? Where we're coming in, we're trying to convince people, hey, you probably want to build something like this internally because you don't want it to be on a foundational model that can change at any time, or do something completely different. And a lot of people are so used to just, hey, I go buy a license and I get it, and then drag and drop and we're good to go. And in this stage where we're at right now, it's all changing so fast that you could go stick. I think Zapier is they're in the agentic AI game now, or at least a buddy of mine was telling me about it. You could go choose that, click the easy button, or you could try building something internally. But if you need something really custom that's really designed for your system, right now you kind of have to build it. At least that's been my experience for a lot of stuff. So it's a fascinating discussion I'm sure a lot of organizations are having, because the whole way we're thinking about technology and software and now AI and agentic AI, it's just going to be different, I think. And I don't know how it's going to look when it's all said and done, but I'm sure somebody will answer that for us at some point.
Gartner says by, I think, 2026, that 33% of enterprise applications will either feature or be entirely driven by agents. And so if you think about the context switch that's going to be for a lot of people, it's not just apps anymore, it's little task completing entities, and they're making decisions. I think another thing that's really important, especially on the decision piece, is, and something that's not always talked about, is understanding where your decisions are being made. So if you have foundational models, that's doing a lot of operational thinking for your team. And so your strategy in some ways is being shaped by the models that you choose. And so thinking about demanding features like bring your own LLM, or in some cases, adding your own custom models or small language models. My co-founder Henry is obsessed with small language models, but the idea of really thinking through, these aren't just models that are performing against benchmarks, because that's valuable, but they're actually the way in which our organization is going to be making decisions. And it's going to be the way that we execute strategy. And so where we are positioning ourselves, not just from a vendor perspective, but really from a reasoning perspective, is important for us to not only choose, but also track over time, because it's so easy to wind up 2 or 3 years down the road, locked into a couple of contracts, and then going, actually, all of our decisions are made by X model. And actually, we're not happy with that. We'd rather have had Y model, or we'd rather have built something ourselves to kind of judge that, LLM as judge, and to act against it. And so really thinking through how decision making changes the game for the models that you choose, and also the way that you deploy software, the way that you think about your operational strategy. It's not just a piece of pre-existing kind of arbitrary code. It's actively making choices. And so the risks are different and the governance has to be different.
Yeah, those are again, we kind of echo much of what you're saying, just not, I don't think quite as eloquently, but we come from that same world where
Definitely not.
we treat our customers, we call them partners because we couldn't succeed without them because of institutional knowledge and things like, and they can contact Robert and I directly, like they have our cell phone numbers, like please call us in the evening. We're probably up being crazy anyways. Robert's talked to a CFO today. I've talked to a CFO and a CEO within the last day or two, and like we see the beauty of like SaaS is going to die. I think there's always going to be the big SaaS players, but I think these more catered solutions, because of how easy it is to stand up, is going to kind of take over the marketplace, for lack of a better term. And I think that's what's going to differentiate the mid-market companies, the small businesses, from the enterprises, right? Because enterprises are big, like you said, they're led by committees, which isn't a bad thing. We have a lot of rules and governance like Sarbanes-Oxley and stuff because of that, because if there's been errors in the past. But that opens up a huge opportunity for smaller businesses to punch above the weight class, is what we like to say, and kind of be more nimble and be more agile. But for that to happen, you have to have champions across the entire organization who care about mitigating risk, who care about choosing the right model, who care about, hey, do we go for this off the shelf model, or do we train an open source model like Gemma or Llama or something along those lines? And I think having a technology partner like yourselves to have those conversations to kind of guide you in that direction is super, super important, especially if you don't have dedicated IT teams and AI teams and things like that, which is again going to be most mid-market companies. But like Robert was saying, the mid-market companies we work with have a couple hundred employees and $100 or $200 million a year EBITDA. Like, so they're not small companies, but they're still, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of companies. And so it's great that there are going to be platforms like yours, or platforms like MCP or agent-to-agent protocols that can give them the foundations, and then they can, bring in a SME every now and then to do the things they need to do. And so that kind of brings me to my next thing about Geordie. So I really love how you guys illustrate this on your front page. You have illuminate, govern, and scale. Can you just take us through those 3 steps and like what that means for a business as they're adopting these technologies?
Yeah. So AI adoption happens at the speed of trust. So the first thing you need to start scaling your adoption is visibility. If you don't know what you have, you can't put trust in it. And if you don't know how it works or what it's up to, then you really have no way to scale it and also to measure value. So first thing is illuminate. I'll go into the Geordie story after this because there's a lot of light metaphors that will make a lot more sense after that. But really focused on discovery. Where do I have AI agents? And effectively, what are they doing? What are they capable of from a posture management perspective? What are they configured to do? Which MCPs do they use? Which users do they interact with? Which tools are they configured with? Which functions can they perform? And that really contributes to risk, but it also has to be confirmed with observation. So the next piece is govern. So what are those agents practically doing? What are they actually behaving like? And how do we start to understand that from a transparency perspective and a behavioral observability perspective? And then you get into the risk side of things, because once you know what they're capable of and what they're doing, you then need to go, okay, now what do I do about it? How do I think about risk? How do I understand their risk from an expectation perspective and also from what they're actually doing, their existing actions? And then you want to be able to mitigate that risk. And so that gets to us towards scale. So how do you think about context interventions so that risks don't even happen? You prevent them before they get there to help agents behave better, to make better decisions. And then you want to be able to report everything. One of the most important things about agents is auditability. So that transparency is really important for runtime, if you like, or for when agents are operating, but it's equally as important for when you're reporting something. So when you're going to the board and you're saying, this is how we're doing, or when you're responding to an audit questionnaire, when you're going through and reporting to your security team or your governance and risk team about how these different business initiatives are working. And quite often it can be really empowering for governance and risk people because they're not always super technical. They're not always people who've had a lot of technical backgrounds or have had to use a lot of technical tools. And so sometimes they're asking questions, but they may not have all of the information that they need. And so a tool like Geordie can really help them to speak the business language, but also to have the data that they need to make informed decisions. And so it's really about scaling across that autonomy, because any pilot could be cool. It could be really exciting. It can be really interesting. But the way that you actually scale adoption is by building trust in those systems. And the only way that you're going to build trust is if you have, number one, ways to control it. And number two, you can see what it's doing. So you have that visibility, because that's fun. That's fundamentally where humans build trust.
Yeah, that's good stuff there. One of my questions I had as well, who is your typical client that you're seeing, or who's kind of who you're marketing to, and if it is industry specific, or if you have any industries in particular as well, I think that'd give a lot of context to the listeners.
Yeah, so we're really focused on helping security teams to partner with the business to enable AI innovation. And so for us, the key audience, the key focus is helping security and IT teams solve the problems that are associated with AI agents. That comes from unexpected behavior, that comes from a lack of understanding sometimes around how the business thinks about AI, and really helping them to become enablers of the business, and also giving them the data that they need to be part of those strategic decisions, because you don't want to have someone flying blind. You really want them to be equipped with all the information so that they can make the best choices, because sometimes uncertainty can also stall adoption. When you're thinking about, I'm not sure how to govern this, so I better just hold off for now, rather than actually, I have governance principles baked in. So I know that even if something happens that I wasn't anticipating, I'm going to limit the surprises. I'm going to be able to control and at least see what I have and make great choices from there about how I implement mitigations or change policies or adhere to policies and regulatory requirements. So I think other than that, we're super horizontal. Pretty much everybody who's adopting AI agents is a customer to us. And the other piece is around kind of how you think about AI agents. If you're just building one AI agent, you probably have that in hand. If you're operating across multiple systems, if you're building multiple AI agents, coding agents always get forgotten for some reason because developers are technical, I think. But if you're using coding agents, and really it's about, like, are you trying to scale AI agents across your business to deliver value? If so, Geordie could help you.
Awesome. Yeah, I was kind of thinking back to my days. I worked for a hospital here in Houston and had around 20,000 employees, and I imagine they're probably having discussions like this internally, where people have definitely in those environments of that size created things because Microsoft made it really easy to do so for a lot of people. And so there's like you're saying, a ton of there's agent sprawl or whatever you want to call it out in the environment doing all kinds of stuff. Nobody knows. IT doesn't know what's going on. There's like, hey guys, I'll disable it now, but the damage is already done. And then the security team's asking them, well, who created what and how did they create it? What is it doing? And nobody knows the answer. And so it sounds like you kind of come in, wrangle all that in, give everybody the insights. And I'm actually going to text a few people after this just to ask how they're doing, because it reminded me from some of I always joked with my arch enemies over in the security team, but I'll ask how they're doing in this AI space and how they're doing for security for sure. Because I can only, in my head, I can just see all these technical operational folks that are a little more technical than most would definitely go out and create and use this stuff, but who knows how they're doing it, what they have access to. And luckily, I mean, here's a question. Would you say Microsoft and Copilot, are they doing a pretty good job at securing these agents that people are making, like just out of the box, or is it kind of just a catch-all? Because I definitely, the market, I feel, thinks Microsoft's doing a pretty good job from that front, like on the security side, right? At least that's the perception I've been told.
Yeah, I think they do a great job. I think a lot of agent vendors, they're iterating really quickly. So they're building a lot of features, and the focus on functionality makes a ton of sense. I think from a table stakes security perspective, 100%. Microsoft knows their baseline security. They're very good at security measures. I think the most important point is thinking beyond just the individual agent and really thinking about how those systems are going to work and how you're going to get visibility into that. And so, especially once you get beyond not even just a couple of Copilot agents, but even between Foundry and Copilot, there's differences. And so then when you think about how you build that out, especially if you're using coding agents also, or if you're using other platforms, that whole ecosystem has to have visibility. And so, Microsoft individually is doing a great job, and you have to think about them, but you also have to think about the broader picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead,
Brad.
Robert.
I was thinking the MCP stuff kind of scares me because it's a lot of people don't realize it's just kind of like an open door to an environment if it's configured incorrectly. And I don't know how it gets fixed, but I feel like it should be a lot more secure than it actually is. Because I've been, whenever I get time, that's what I mess with the most, and it's kind of crazy what you could set up pretty easily. And I could just see nefarious people creating these, templates and stuff people are using that'll just funnel a bunch of data out of their environment without them even knowing.
Yeah, it's like a lot of technology. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it has the immense opportunity to be so helpful because they're basically context engines. They're a way to inject context really quickly. They're fantastic at service delivery. They're fantastic at scale. But obviously, they have vulnerabilities. They have insecure ways of configuring them, not too dissimilar, kind of the next step up from APIs. And, there's a ton of value there. No one would ever say don't use APIs. But you have to think about how do you secure them. You have to think about how they operate. And then agent to agent communications. So once you start that multi-agent system, that's really thinking kind of the next tier up. And so it's almost like initial data, collaboration, and then orchestration. And so it really is kind of a schema. And I think sometimes people can be put off by the stories that they hear about MCP, but they're fundamental. It's like a website, like there's ways that you can misuse a website, but they're so critical to how we think about operations now that you have mitigations, and it's worth the risk. And I think that's another thing, is that you can't ever get to a zero risk scenario. I think the idea that you'll eventually get to this prime operating space where everything's perfect and nothing has to move. What you need to do, though, is limit your surprises, is mitigate things proactively and try to essentially control as many variables as you can, and also cushion impacts. And so that's why having contextual inputs for agent behavior is so important. That's why having visibility is so important. And I think then the last piece is around thinking through those pieces of technology, that it's so easy in security to get lost in the jargon, but it is worth doing the research and just skimming through what the difference is between APIs, basic data, deterministic flows, MCPs, context engines, the next level up when it comes to providing specific functions or tools, and then agent to agent, where you start to make this multi-system and really collaborative.
Yeah, those are again. I think you give a great roadmap, because basically the reason that Microsoft Copilot makes so much sense is because 90% of Fortune 500 companies live in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, and whenever you go create an agent, it's tied to your user account and all of your access controls, and just like the Power Platform before with Power Automate and Power Apps and things. So you weren't going to be able to go access data that you didn't already have access to. Once you get to that second level where you got MTP or agent protocol, that's whenever you need to have that wider scope of the risk and governance and security conversations with your organization to make sure that you have that, row level security and things that they're not being able to do the things they do. So I think we're talking kind of about two different things, but at the same time, I think it's good to have that context too. So I guess that kind of, we could keep going on forever and ever, but I know you're super busy. You just launched this week. And so I think we can start winding things down, but like maybe we could just finish off with like the top 1 to 2 questions that you would ask before deploying an agent into any workflow with a customer of basically any size. What are the 1 or 2 or 3 top questions that you would say immediately, other than what problem you're trying to solve? Because we preach that all the time too, like McKinsey and company.
You got me. I was absolutely
Yeah.
going to say that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use that, but then I'll give you another 2.
Okay.
What problem would you solve? What problem are you trying to solve? Because ultimately, like, it's such an important rudder in terms of how you're going to guide the project. The next thing I would ask is, how many technical resources do you have, and are you willing to devote them to this? If the answer is very few or no, then you probably want to think about something that is either low code, no code. Maybe it's a verticalized agent that's already purpose built, but something that's probably less build, more buy. And then the next piece that I would ask is, how are you measuring success, and how are you going to observe what it's doing? Because a lot of times, unfortunately, there's kind of this idea that it is like traditional software and you just plug it in and then it works. But it's different. It's a decision-making entity. And so it's like having a little third-party contractor that you're bringing on and kind of texturing something for yourself. And so you, of course, want to give them onboarding, you want to give them context, but then you're not just going to turn them loose because they have role and access permissions. You're going to want to figure out what they're doing every day. You want to figure out how they're operating, and also how you put mitigations in place in case they do something you don't want them to do. It's the same idea for agents. So really thinking through, how am I observing what agents are doing, especially post deployment? Because sometimes there's a real fixation from the generative AI movement around testing, evaluations, and kind of pre-deployment checks. And those are really helpful, but these are non-deterministic systems. You can test them 1,000 times, and on the 1,001st time, they'll do something completely new. So you have to have that understanding of, in flight, what is this agent actually doing every day? How am I checking on it? And how do I know if something's going wrong? So really having that understanding of operations and governance is critical to the long-term success, getting out of that pilot phase and going to scale.
That's great. That's a lot of, we try to preach that to clients we work with and potential clients of trying to figure all this out together, right? Because that's kind of what everybody's doing a little bit right now. I think, Brad, unless you had anything else, I think we could start getting to the rapid fire questions that we have.
I just
And
want to tell the
yeah,
Geordie
for sure.
only because I promise the light metaphors will make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, definitely go into it, because I'm very curious, because I saw it on the website, but I didn't get a time to look at it.
So I don't think we're the only people to do this, but we really think we were the first people to do this. We think that there's a huge parallel between the Industrial Revolution and the Agentic Revolution. There's a huge amount of innovation. There's a huge step change in the workforce and the way that not only technology operated, but also the way that it impacted business, the way that it impacted our day-to-day lives. And we see that same parallel in agents today. It's changing the way that businesses do things. It's changing the way that they operate. It's changing the resources they have to dedicate to tasks. And it's also changing the way that we live our day-to-day lives. And it was really important to think about safety back then, because quite often with technological revolutions, number one, they're not optional. You're kind of all in for it. And then number two, there can be a lot of human suffering in that process, and you really want to minimize that. So the example that we pulled the Geordie lamp from is coal mining. Coal powered so much of the Industrial Revolution. It was critical to all of those innovations, but it was also dangerous. It wasn't something that was super easy to just take off the walls. Flammable gases built up, and it caused a lot of risks that you couldn't see with the naked eye. So it brought a lot of risks to workers, but they weren't always things that you could anticipate. They weren't always hazards that you could have known about before you stepped into that mine. And so there were mining lamps invented all across the world, including the Geordie lamp, that basically illuminate what was difficult to see before. So it was a really simple lamp, little brass casing, and there was a candle inside. And as the miners would chip coal off the walls, if flammable gases built up too much, the oxygen pressure would change and the candle would go out. So essentially, you would then have immediate line of sight into invisible risk. And so we believe that we're doing the same thing, and that's our mission, is to basically give enterprises the new Geordie lamp to help them to understand invisible risks with agents and also scale their AI innovation wrapped in governance.
That's all. I'm glad you told that because that is awesome. I did not know the parallels there. That's some good parallels for you guys. So that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
Thank you.
and
fascinating.
it really it aligns with a lot of what we say because I give a lot of talks, and whenever I give a lot of talks, I bring up the innovation waves. Right, we're in the sixth wave right now. The seventh is probably AGI and agentic AI, and the industrial revolution was the largest of those waves. Where once we got steam power and rail and streets and electricity and chemicals and those things. So I'm glad you did bring that up as well, and I love the history aspect of it too. I'm a bit of a nerd, so I'm
Yeah,
glad
I'm an
you made a
absolute
point to bring it
history
up.
geek, so it really worked for me. That and when you try to look back at the space age, they're mostly engineer named objects, so they're all functional, like third winge, and you're like, this is not going to be, this is not going to be
Right.
good.
Awesome.
So the last couple minutes, we just try to throw out some questions. You can answer them as quick as you'd like, obviously, but a minute or two, I think, is what we ask. Just curious, outside of just AI, agentic AI, what's a book or a thinker or somebody that's inspired you on, how to lead or how to start a company? Because that's a big jump. Who's that person or book or thing for you?
So for me, that is Brene Brown. I absolutely love her work. She's a social anthropologist. She does a ton of work around socialization and vulnerability and how belonging works. And there's a huge amount of leadership principles. She has dedicated leadership books, but things like Daring Greatly, that there's so many great principles. And I think the number one thing that I took away, especially from the body of her work, is really about vulnerability, not having to come always from a position of strength and not as a leader having to have all the answers, but instead asking questions, being open to other people knowing more than you. I really like the old adage of if you're the smartest person in the room, find a new room. I really think that that is super valuable. And so for me, that would be Brene Brown.
That's great. Again, we'll be providing links and context in the show notes, and then we release a newsletter on LinkedIn where we'll have all the links and resources that we talk about here. So we'll definitely have a link to that to Renee Brown in the book. That's great. I'm definitely going to be looking that one up. I'm a big reader, so looking forward to that. I guess moving on from that, what's your favorite AI tool that you use personally?
Absolutely, Perplexity. It hands down is so great. I do a lot of market research, as you would expect, and it is just so good at not only pulling back really relevant market research, but you can really rapid fire. I always joke with my CEO, Henry, that I really put my AI tools through their paces. I really stretch the limits of our contracts with them. So being able to pull back really valuable research and also have it structured in a way, I love structured data, have it structured in a way that really makes sense, and I'm able to iterate on it and then build things with it. And also just the searching experience is really great. I still Google. There are people who say I've abandoned a traditional search and I only AI search now. I don't. I'm old school. I still Google. But I would also say Perplexity is super.
I want to step in really quick and mention that, and again, I'll link this in the show notes, folks. But if you link your PayPal to Perplexity right now, you get a free year. It may be US only. I'm not sure if it's around the world, but you get a free year of Perplexity Pro, which is $20 a month. And then you can utilize the Perplexity browser comment, which I'm recording this podcast on right now, which I love. And so that's just to throw it out there. I've become to love Perplexity as well, and being able to switch between the multiple models and things. Robert and I have talked about, like, it's hard to abandon ChatGPT and all the contextual data we have in there, but I'm slowly making my way over there. But I agree that Perplexity is really great. Robert, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, and I'll add, just curious, Hannah, have you used the Perplexity browser at all and any cool things you've done? I've seen a lot of cool stuff on Twitter. I'm just curious. I haven't had time to use it as much as I'd like.
Haven't really. I've been heads down. I haven't really gotten to play with it. I still use ChatGPT. I think I always try to optimize, so I make it do really menial tasks. So I think my ChatGPT is probably less fun than other people's. But I still use it. I like Complexity too, but I haven't played with Comet yet.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I've been using Comet. I got an early invite from my friend Arnold Castro. Arnold, if you're listening, thank you. So I've been using it for quite some time, and it's still. One time it sent an email I didn't want it to send, because it was just sending an email for me. The cool thing is it can plug into external services. It still doesn't have the Microsoft 365 connectors yet, but if you have Google services and stuff, it can do a lot of things with your email and calendar and things. I just can't wait to see where it goes from here. But again, I've made it go where, no, you're not going to do anything automatically. You're going to do it for me and then say, would you like to send? Because it did send an email way before I should have sent it. So again, there's that human in the loop, the risk that Geordie does that you need to keep an eye on. So that's great. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, what's something that you wish you knew, probably in your younger years, starting out in your career, that you know now. And at least for me, I've learned so much just running and starting this business for a year. So I imagine you've got the same. What's something you wish you could tell yourself, or a change you would make, or anything like that?
I think it would probably be the value of understanding seasons. Your life, I think, is broken down into different seasons, and trying to expect the same thing in different circumstances can really be disheartening and disappointing. So, understanding when you're in a season of crazy busyness and you're just going to commit to that, and not punishing yourself constantly for moving priorities or for changing things or for a lack of sleep and an excess of coffee, kind of forgiving yourself for that. And also seasons where you need to appreciate the work-life balance that you do have, where you have a more stable career and you're not as busy, really digging into those and making the most of them. I think so often we kind of fast forward through experiences and we don't always appreciate where we are. And we sometimes therefore hold ourselves to unrealistic expectations. So if I could talk to previous Hannah, I would say, understand that this is seasonal, and the thing that is true in the moment may not be true in the next moment. So you just have to operate in the truth of the moment, appreciate the season you're in, and try to adjust as quickly as you can. I think one of the greatest life skills is being adaptive. It's true from a sociological perspective. It's true from a work perspective. Not always having to have everything your way. Uh, I can be completely flexible as long as everything's exactly how I want it. So not always having to have everything fit your idea of how something's going to work, and being able to sort of ride the waves.
That's awesome. That's been my mantra. My mantra this year has been just take it day by day. Don't try to, over analyze, overthink, or get frustrated in that moment. Cause like you said, that doesn't mean that's how it's going to be tomorrow. So it's
I
good
think
stuff.
also for a founder, if I could give myself one piece of kind of immediate advice, is do the next most important thing. You have so many different things that could demand your attention. You have so many different things that you could do, and they're all valuable. What's the next most important thing? Like eating an elephant one bite at a time. What's the next thing that you have to get done? And all these other things are valuable, but they're less urgent than this one. My co-founder, Benji, he always talks about the last responsible moment. So thinking through like, what's the thing I need to do right now? And then how do I shift the other things to do them at some point, but maybe not in this moment? Because otherwise you can kind of get task overwhelmed. So don't worry, multiple hats is normal. Having a ton of tasks is normal. Just pick the thing that you have to do at this moment, and often pick the worst thing. So the French have a saying, eat the frog first. So do the thing that is least fun, but probably most valuable in that moment, and then do the other stuff.
All great advice, and something we generally try to preach ourselves as well. But Robert and I are both our own worst critics. So I would say, much like what I think you're kind of alluding to, Hannah, is give yourself a break. As long as you're putting in your best effort every day and you're trying your best every day, tomorrow could be a different season, right? Just keep making that step. Take that next bite of the elephant. I think is something great advice, just great life advice, just not just for your day-to-day business life, but just life in general. We're all in the same crazy predicament. So just we're all doing the best we can. So just remember that. And so again, Hannah, thanks for joining us. I wish we could talk for hours and hours because you just have so much insights. I wish we could got more into the clandestine operations, maybe another day. But until then, why don't you just take a couple of minutes to tell people how, again, about Geordie, about yourselves, how they can get involved, how they can reach out to you. This is a stage for you. But also, I want this last question. Can you just let folks out there know what it felt like as you've gone through this journey with your team, you've assembled this team, you've put in the sweat equity, and you guys have launched a product and it's now out there for the world to see. What does that feel like?
Honestly, it feels like just the beginning. There's so much of this that is a wonderful milestone, and there's so much of it that's like, no, we still have so much more that we're doing, and we still have so much more that we're building, and we still have so much more runway in front of us. So I think the truth of it is it feels like, great, now what are we building next? And I think probably a lot of founders can relate to that. I think it's also really exciting because we have great partners and our investors. We were really, really happy with the teams that backed us. They really understood the vision, and they really believed in what we were building, rather than just thinking that the tech was cool. They really saw the problem solution fit. I think also the amazing team that we've assembled, I really wouldn't want to do this with anybody else. So I'm super grateful because it's wonderful to work in a place where you like everyone you work with. It's a treat. Yeah, that's how it feels. So what is Geordie? Give me the TLDR. What do I need to know? Well, the first thing you need to know is that agents are the future of work. AI agents are powerful, they're autonomous, they're transformative, and most businesses want to accelerate adoption, but they do face hard to manage risks. It's really difficult, especially at enterprise scale, to adopt AI. Sometimes they don't have a full understanding of what AI means in the context that they're using it. Their businesses need enablement. And also with security teams, they need to be able to say yes to innovation, but they also have to have controls in place so that if something goes wrong, they're not just left holding the bag for risk. They really have meaningful controls to implement and make changes. And so one of the things that can really slow that adoption is risk without control. Agents introduce risks because they're non-deterministic. They behave, they make choices, they can misuse tools, they can operate in siloed systems sometimes, so it can be difficult to understand what they're doing. And that can threaten security compliance and operational resilience. And so one of the things that is really important up front is that when you have just manual oversight, or when you just have static controls, or when you have previous technology that's designed around traditional software, it just can't keep pace. These are machine speed employees that have decisional authority. And so it's really, really different from traditional software. So what does Geordie do? We govern agent behavior. We bring posture management, observability, and contextual interventions to help turn blind spots into visibility, unmanaged risks into governed outcomes. And we're really focused on helping security teams say yes to innovation. Everybody wants to be the technical person that says, yes, I can do this. Everybody wants this part of their careers to be exciting and cutting edge. Nobody wants to be curmudgeon and say, no, I don't want to help innovate. You really want to be able to say yes, but you also want to be responsible, because saying yes constantly isn't going to get you the outcomes that you want. It's saying yes, knowing that you have governance in place. And so how do you get enterprise-ready adoption? You have to align agent behavior in enterprise frameworks, security, and compliance. You need the ability to inject context so that agents can make better decisions over time and limit surprises. And you also want to be able to gain confidence in your AI systems. You have to build trust through visibility and controls. You put brakes in a car to help you go faster. So it's really thinking about, how can I say yes to innovation? How can I build this new function in my business? How can I improve? How can I create competitive advantage without sacrificing security and controls? So that's what we do. We help enterprises safely accelerate AI adoption by illuminating blind spots, managing risk, governing behavior with contextual and dynamic controls. We make agents secure, compliant, and enterprise ready.
Awesome. And how can folks get a hold of you and to learn more?
They can go to my LinkedIn, Hanah Darley. I am available. I'm free to chat. They can go to www.geordie.ai. It's GEORDIE, like Newcastle, as well as like LaForge, if you're a Star Trek fan, and very, very much accessible through the website. There's also some articles there. So if you're looking to read more, if you want to know more about MCPs, you want to know more about agents, you want to think more about risk, there's lots of content there for you, and a really easy way to get in touch with us. We have a demo link straight in there, so you'll be able to book a demo and chat to us and get to meet us in person, hopefully.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll provide links to all of this in the show notes and also the newsletter. So head to linktree.com/digitalmeld, and the newsletter link is right at the top of that. And within that link tree, as well as a link to all the other places you can get a hold of Robert, myself, and Digital Meld, and also all the links to other ways that you can listen to the podcast. We do have this podcast on video on YouTube and Spotify. Please give it a like and subscribe, and maybe a rating. It really, really helps us. But until then, I think we'll hear it next week. And again, thank you, Hannah, for joining us. So Robert, you have anything else?
No, I think that was it. That was great. Thanks so much, Hannah.
It was a treat. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and agents are coming, folks. So head over to Geordie AI and learn more about it, and reach out to Hannah. Thanks until
Coming
next
to
week.
a neighborhood near you.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We want to hear about your AI and automation journey, and we'd love for you to get involved with Start Small, Think Big. If you'd like to participate or offer feedback, please reach out to us anytime via email at contact@digitalmeld.io, or use the contact form on our website, digitalmeld.io/contact. Also, please help spread the word by liking, subscribing, and sharing our podcasts on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks.